Hello, everybody. I'm April Page. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at Data. And on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for joining us today. The title of today's webinar is Stopping Fraud in Its Tracks with Email Intelligence Data. And we'll be hearing from Phil Davis at Data's CBO. And our guest today is Tim Lee, who is an entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and a professor at USC School of Engineering. So welcome to Tim, and looking forward to hearing about this discussion. So just as everyone trickles in, a few housekeeping items. There is mute on audio and video today automatically, so you don't have to worry about interrupting. We are recording the session today, and we'll be following up with the replay via email in a few days. So if you want to go back and listen to anything or share it with others, feel free. We have a Q&A section, so if you would please use the questions section on the right for any questions that you might have throughout the session. I'll be asking Phil and Tim those questions at the end of the session. But if we happen to not get to all the questions, we'll follow up with anyone directly that didn't get answered. So without further ado, Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very good. And good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for taking the time to join us in our conversation. I'm Phil Davis. I'm the Chief Business Officer at Data. I've been with the company 10 years. I joined when the legacy company of Data, which is Tower Data and Fresh Address, which merged to form Data, but when Tower Data acquired Rapidly 10 years ago, I joined the organization. And back in those days, we started playing around with email intelligence data and identified the opportunity to use that data and tie that data to an email address and discover potential fraud activity. And over those past 13 years, we spent a significant amount of time improving the process of getting the data we need, and certainly improving a solution and the outputs for our clients. One of our very early clients in that solution and someone who really helped us identify that solution about 12 years ago was Tim Lee. And so let's give Tim a chance to introduce him, but it's great to have him here again, talking about how we can help our clients fight fraud in the digital economy.
Great, awesome, Phil. Thank you, and April, thank you for moderating. Again, Phil and I has been 13 years. That's scary. Have been working on this informally for a long time. My career started as an engineer working for Intel Corporation making microprocessors, and one thing led to another. I restarted my career in banking, working at one of the biggest banks out there, JPMorgan Chase, all the way down to some of the subprime lenders in the consumer lending space. And that's how I met Tower Data, Fresh Address, and then later on become Data. And I was talking to Phil yesterday while we're prepping for the session that I felt like I was haggling him every day, calling him left and right and say, hey, Phil, this data is really useful, and here's how we're gonna. We have found a lot of success using this data to detect fraud. So I'm happy to be here today, talking to all of you guys about fraud detection, and feel free to give us questions throughout this webinar. Phil.
Absolutely. And we're the reason we're talking about this topic is, as digital marketers, the increase in fraud-based attacks and all sorts of attacks have been on the rise. And let's talk a little bit about why we see companies experiencing, Tim, in your experience, what's happened over the past few years that has created this increased concern for brands that are accepting payment online.
Yeah, well, internet, mobile, and availability of data to the point where there have been data breaches, these type of cybersecurity attacks almost on a daily basis. So in the risk management space that I'm in, we automatically assume that everybody's data is already being out there, sold 3-4 times. So it puts a lot of pressure on financial services companies or retailers or payments companies to understand why a person, a client or a potential client logging in or applying for certain things. Just because everybody's data is out there, and it doesn't take a whole lot for a criminal organization or fraudsters, individuals to kind of start attempting certain things, right? Either apply on your behalf for certain products and services, or attempt to take over your account, which could cause a lot of damages to the company themselves and to the individuals. So it's just happening a lot more now with the advent of availability of this data. Phil, what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the other challenge is, the ability to use, bot generated information. When there's a data breach, the end game for a fraudster is to create an account in order to go in and make purchases that are not going to be tied back to their credit card. They're going to use stolen cards, stolen identities, and they're going to use newly created email addresses. And
right.
All these data breaches at the end of the day is just providing more ingredient and fuel for a fraudster to have access to other people's information, to create fake accounts and really try to game the system, whether it's outright theft to coupon abuse, etc., return abuse.
That's right.
All eats into profits of organizations.
Account takeovers, wallet takeovers, all of that is all super prevalent now.
Absolutely. And so when you think about it, the cost of fraud, and on our next slide, we look at that. But the payment fraud, 71% of attacks are going to come from payment fraud and identity theft. And so, again, at the account creation level, the concern of somebody using made up information that gets through your filters and allows them to make payment for product, and payments that ultimately results in chargebacks and costs on behalf of vendors. And that has increased tremendously. I think the years of the pandemic provided an opportunity for many other types of services, not just neobanks and some of the fintechs, but if you think about some of the e-commerce companies, suddenly, you weren't going in store to make a purchase. You were making a purchase online, you were transacting online, you were picking up at the store. The same thing happened at fast casuals, and these companies had to adapt real fast. And guess what? Fraudsters are really good at adapting, right, Tim? So
that's right. Yeah, even at some of the traditional banks, you will think that they have layers of protection. One of the banks that I mentioned earlier, where I started working for earlier in my career, on a quarterly basis, we reserved $80 million of losses. Like we basically assumed that this is going to be cost of doing business, and it's going to be a couple $100 million worth of losses that we're going to incur on a annual basis, and we actually put that in our P&L. That's how sad it is back in the days, and that was before we launched online banking and all of that stuff, right? All the way to what it is happening now, where back in the days you can still catch them in the act. Their first attempt, shame on me. Second, third attempt, I can catch them. Nowadays they come in, do a brute force attempt, take a couple $100,000 or a couple $1 million, and they disappear, and they come back in a completely different way. So it puts a lot of pressure on us now, in the industry and on the companies themselves to have multiple layers of these detection to figure out exactly why they're here today.
Absolutely. And so because we're talking about digital, clearly we're talking about like the relationship between a user and the bank, or an e-com company, or a fast casual, or any type of company that's accepting payment online, is going to be through someone's email address. And so, you were very excited, Tim, 12 years ago to play around with our email address intelligence. So let's talk about, how fraud prevention really ties to that email address intelligence for a moment.
Yes, and I'd love to hear more feedback from the audience on this topic. 5, 6, maybe 10 years ago, right? Everybody, my chief marketing officer, my chief X officer are telling me, hey, Tim, we need the fastest way to onboard somebody in a short amount of steps, right? Well, the first thing I have to sort of capture in the online space is their email address, right? First ask for email, and then ask for maybe a phone number and address, and quickly let them know, hey, you got an offer, you sign up, and here's what we're going to provide for you. So a lot of these fraudsters have found a hole, right? Because we essentially didn't do a whole lot of email verification, or the advent of OTP or something like that. It hasn't really appeared on the market yet. So yes, we were getting a ton of traffic, but you could see that there is a good old 15 to 20% of the traffic are sort of, we tagged them as junk traffic. It wasn't really interesting, right? It could be attempt, it could just be people signing up for certain things just for fun to see if we can get away with it. But a portion of those actually got through our system, took out loans, started making payments, taking over accounts, shipping out products, and it caused a lot of damages. And we found to figure out, wait, there's got to be a way to move our defensive mechanism, as top funnel as possible, and that started with email. And once we turn on some of these solutions that we're going to talk about today, it eviscerated about 30–40% of these bad attempts, and it really put a lot less pressure on providing that white glove treatments and all that stuff on the back end. So that's what we found. This is almost a decade ago, and it's just gotten better over the years.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about that top of the funnel, that top of the funnel means, again, in a frictionless experience, right? So a customer is going to do something to become either a prospect or a customer. They're going to register their email address to get information. So maybe they're starting with a mortgage rate, right? Or a lending rate. And they're going to start with, here's some information. It's my email address. Tell me about your rates. Or they're going to make a purchase in a guest checkout scenario. Or they might even sign up for your loyalty program and make a purchase as a signed-in loyal member. And right. But at the beginning, again, that relationship really starts with that email address, because it's really your signature in a digital world. The other benefits that we've seen in email address from 10 years ago, Tim, would you say is the stickiness of that ID, right? So, let's go maybe 13 years ago, we started doing this 12 years ago, it was people were more likely to change an email address than a physical address. That's shifted, right?
That's right.
So,
yeah.
So let's go to the next. There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that?
10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a lot of email providers, right? There's Rocketmail, Hotmail, AOL back in the days, Prodigy even, going further, and everybody sort of settled on Gmail or Yahoo Mail, one of the two big ones, or maybe even MSN.com, if you remember that. If you look at an email today, and if the email was created, and Phil's going to get into how that's even possible, that bit of data, if that was created last week, right, and you are a 35-year-old person trying to apply for a credit card, but the email address is born on 2 weeks ago, there might be an issue here, right? There's no reason why this person is using this kind of an email address, and the only reason why I can discern is probably trying to get away with something or trying to commit fraud. So this born on data is super important to stamp on this.
I think it's really interesting. Right, Tim, the key is that number one, people started to use an email address that they stuck with. They weren't just using their ISP or their work address like we did 20 years ago as our email address. So if you changed jobs or you moved, you got a new email address. You had a portable email address, it stuck with you and it became the center of your identity. And then the other part of it is that the ability to capture data around usage is really powerful.
That's right.
And it's because of the ability to understand normal behavior, looking and identify behavior that looks concerning, there's a great opportunity. And so that email address is becoming an incredibly significant identifier of fraud.
Right. Yep.
Also, you're just not getting anywhere in your relationship without the email address, right?
That's right, exactly. Normal people like you and I, we debate about that, have this email, and we consistently use this email address for a variety of different things in our lives. somebody that invents a new email address, create a new email address 2 weeks ago, trying to do something, signing up, applying for certain things. We all know why that's happening. But you touch on a good point, Phil. Not just the born on date, we can detect that out there in the universe on when this email sort of first appeared in the universe, but also the usage, right? How consistent are you using this email address? Do we see a new email address was created 90 days ago, right? People are smart now to just sleep on that email address, but we now see a surge in activity. That's also a telltale sign that this is going to be used probably for a one-time thing to sweep a bunch of money from all the audience that we have on our webinar and just disappears and create.
Right. And generally with an email address, there's a lot of other trailing data that's really useful, like the IP address, if you have a name and postal at the same time, right? The domain of the email address, all that information, when you bring it all together, tied with behavioral activity data around that email address at massive scale, becomes something really useful for you to detect those normal versus kind of abnormal behaviors.
Right.
And so this email address is really useful. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about, where in the process does this become useful? So, you want to jump in and talk a little bit about, certainly in your experience, you've done a lot with onboarding.
Yes, I mean, it's risk management, and certainly there's a lot of marketing folks on this call, on this webinar. There's a bit of a, give and push here, right? So marketing folks spend a lot of money getting traffic through the website, through the mobile app, trying to get people sign up, and the risk management folks, if you are in finance and credit, are saying that, well, that's good and all, but 20–30% of that is probably a attempt of defrauding us. So getting this stuff up front as early as possible, especially when you're in financial industry, to not walk into all of these regulatory concerns, ECOA, FCRA, that my recommendation is to detect this stuff as soon as possible before they start showing you all the primary PIIs like social security numbers and name and address and things like that. So if you can place something at the very beginning of it saying, what, this email was created last week, or this email was created in the last 90 days, but have a surge in activity, we probably want to put them in a different path. May not be an outright denial, but some kind of a white glove treatment, some kind of a secondary identification or verification to say, well, we don't understand this email, right? And that's before we pull credit, before we pull any other more sensitive information, we want you to jump through hoops or have you pass through a different kind of a outsorting functionality. So if we can nip it at the bud, during the onboarding, maybe to a certain extent during the advertising stage, right? Before you even advertise to this person about this product offering, you probably want to scan that email address to make sure that it's not created for a sleeper email for bad, intuitions. Phil, you want to talk about transactions?
Yeah, well, and certainly in the transactional process too, right? Like before you deliver product, right? Let's make sure it's a good email. Before you give them an online coupon to invite them to come back and get a discount on the service that they're about to steal from you, let's make certain that email address, the person behind that email address, is not, looking to commit fraud. And so especially guest checkouts, but it's really important to think about that customer journey and recognize that if you are concerned, how do you use the additional data fields to make other decisions? We'll talk a little about that later on in the presentation. And then of course, account management, right? Like anytime somebody says, I've got a new email address or I have a new postal address, I'm changing some portion of my identity, you should be treating them like a brand new onboarding experience.
That's right. Account takeover or account management issues is probably the most heinous issues we can experience, right? The customer's at a loss, that the company's embarrassed. So when people log in, right, hey, here's my new email address, we should go through the due diligence, make sure that this new email address is authenticated but verifiable as well. Does this email address actually belong to some people? Because most people don't have multi-factor authentication turned on, right? And somebody will log in with their email and password that's leaked out onto the dark web, logged in, change the email, and start transacting, right? Nobody's going to be happy when that happens. And it's very easy to verify that email address when there is a new email being added as a primary account, as a primary email in your account.
Right, and absolutely, as an underlying challenge that you all face, if you're a marketer, is your consumers demands a frictionless transactional process, a frictionless onboarding process. which means that they want to move through the journey quickly, easily, and without having providing a lot of information that will slow down that journey. And that's a competitive requirement that you have. And so having ways to check to make certain that you're talking to a safe customer is really critical at this point. Tim, why don't we jump into some use cases, because they're certainly fun. So, the first one, it's a Payday cash advance company. Why don't you talk first a little bit about the success, kind of the numbers, the value that you were able to immediately pull out of using the data format?
Yeah, this is a story we've been telling to each other for a long time, for decades. And this is one of the firms that I worked with in the subprime lending space about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. At the time, I joined and I started scanning all the data assets that we have. And as it turned out, we had, tower data ingested through our API in our underwriting system for about 2 years. And I think it was just sitting there waiting for somebody to come and analyze the data and see if it's effective. So we quickly ran some research because we had that luxury of 2 years worth of data and 2 years of outcomes. And we found out that I ran into the CEO's office. I still remember that day. Say, hey, what is this? Who bought it? Can we use it? What's going on? And he's like, wait, are you telling me we're not using this stuff? I'm like, well, had we used it, we would have saved close to $30 million over 2 years of losses. We were able to cut losses, essentially just third-party fraud, by that much. And he said, what are you doing in my office? Go and turn this thing on right now. And then I later figure out which company it was, and I started harassing Phil and saying, hey, Phil, you got to use this data to defend fraud. This is the thing that saved us that year. So this is a story. It was just I don't know I'm lost for words.
It was super exciting from my perspective.
We started digging today, So
when we started digging into the numbers, Tim, here's a company that expects to have $60 million in fraud in the upcoming year. The company spends a couple $100,000 on data and eliminates over $18 million in fraud in its first year. And it didn't apply any complicated logic. It just did it at creation on an email address only. And the emails that looked like they were fraudulent, they said, thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
To their offer. And that was it. It wasn't a lot, but now we can do so much more.
That's right. And it didn't impact our customer experience, didn't impact our onboarding experience. We simply kicked all these fraudsters out the door day one. Nobody complained about it, and we were pretty happy internally.
Yeah. So that's a great example. So since then, we've advanced, the data we could bring in. We've advanced the product. We've learned a lot from our clients. Let's go over to the next slide, because I think this is a really interesting example of something called Tumbling. And one of the reasons we really want to talk about this is these are bot-generated emails. Think about, using AI to create even more of these faster, right? Like create a legitimate email from this email by adding symbols and spaces and give me 10,000 of them in seconds. And AI can do that. And what a tumbling email is it's a legitimate email address, one email address, but by adding in periods, pluses, symbols, some other things after the plus, it allows the fraudster to monitor the behavior of this email and the success of it through one inbox, and really at scale put an attack on an ecosystem. So in this case, we were really surprised to find that when a consumer, what would look like was a legitimate consumer, was provided an email address in order to get a coupon, what they were really doing was trying to get as many coupons as they could to sell on some other marketplace. And so these coupons were getting resold. We often refer to that as friendly fraud, but it has a huge cost because it messes with your cost for the coupons that you've identified.
Yeah.
Tim, is there anything else you wanted to add to this?
No, these $2 off your burger, you know, $1 off your drinks and things like that might seem innocuous to a lot of people, but once you have this kind of a technique, shall I say it, it may look like a marketing success, but at the end of the day, these aren't legitimate customers, and they're turning around and selling these $2 coupons for 99 cents on the dark web, right? It sounds like, you know, a renegade high school student that's doing this, but this is actually a pretty big industry. So, and it's pretty easy to detect this kind of stuff. This is all for all the marketing folks online. They could burn through your marketing budget really quickly, and nobody's happy afterwards.
Yeah. Exactly. Excellent. So peer-to-peer payment platforms. So we have a few people from the fraud industry on this call, and we've got a lot of marketers. Tim, you want to just give just an overview of like what a peer-to-peer payment platform looks like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them out there now, right? Starting with PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. There's a bunch of them out there now, right? Where you open an account, right? Drag some money into the wallet, and you could, you know, send money to your friends, you know, whatever it might be, right? Peer-to-peer payments. So this creates another sort of access point, if you will, a hotspot for fraudsters to do, again, account takeovers. That's sort of off the bank rail, right? There's a lot of defensive mechanism now, but on these newly created wallets and peer-to-peer payment platforms, there's another vector of attack from these fraudsters, whether it's account opening and or account takeover, and start making payments during your wallet. And we heard these stories up and down the block for the past couple of years, but that's it's another thing we ought to watch out for. And when they do
merchant these platforms, right? Tim?
What's that now?
I'm sorry. Good. And these platforms are super popular now in the gig economy, right? The solopreneur who opens up shop and wants to be able to take their payment immediately, right? Someone who comes and washes your windows and can immediately take your payment.
That's right.
The platforms are pretty good at vetting that entrepreneur, but suddenly they're taking payment from a whole new world of people.
Yeah, merchants get screwed, and then the people's wallet get drained. It's a two-sided problem on these platforms.
Exactly, and it's the non-vetted payee that can really create concern and create significant chargeback issues that affect downstream a lot of places.
Because these platforms, they're not giving out money, they're not giving out credit. It's basically, hey, open an account, load some money, pay somebody else, right? To them, the platforms, they're not at a loss, right? But the merchant's going to be getting hurt at the end. Solopreneurs and or people that moved a couple $1,000s in the wallet thinking that they will pay people, and it gets taken over. The wallet gets taken over, and nobody's really happy, you know.
Absolutely. So a best practice that we've seen here for our clients in this space is when I'm taking payment before I give service, you have someone just register an email address, and therefore you could have the opportunity to weed out fraudsters before service is provided. And that's a best case way to work through a really simple, easy transaction and make it safe and secure.
That's right.
Let's go to go ahead, Tim. Yeah, the neobanks. So Tim, your expertise. So why don't you talk a little bit about neobanks?
Yes, I've been helping a lot of neobanks to get started. Again, what a wonderful wealth of point of attack, right? A lot of people, a lot of fraudsters are moving away from banks because it's getting harder now, a little bit harder now. So they're attacking these neobanks, and there are tons of them out there. There's a couple hundred of them out there now around the world. And the first point of interest is your mobile phone and your email address, your phone number, and things like that, right? Again, these neobanks aren't really offering credit loans just yet. The first thing they're going to do is have you open up a checking account, maybe divert some of your direct deposit over. Again, just like the digital wallet, right? This is another point of attack where your phone could get hacked, or your username and password could get exposed. People log in, reset the email address. There's no verification. You know, all they have is OTP. Of course, they have access to their email, the newly created email address, and they drain the account, whatever that's in there, or they start making payments to other utilities or other people, merchants, right? And it all end up being losses. Right now, the neobanks are experiencing a lot of this bad traffic, if you will. It hasn't reared its ugly head yet, but 8 to 10% of losses are probably due to some of these attempts. The fraudsters have found a new home, so to speak, in today's world.
Absolutely. So as we think about, the changes in the payment space in these use cases, before we get on to the next slide, let's think about, there's been a lot of change in how people make payment, whether it's buy now, pay later programs, right? And they're on every website at the end of your checkout, right? Do you want to split your payments up? To how about buy now, pick up at the curbside pickup?
That's right.
It's not. I don't think it's going away. And
yeah,
the challenges that it faces, the obvious challenge for curbside pickup is payment is made, a service is provided, meaning the product is delivered to your car. But again, there's not the same physical transaction that we used to have. So we're very reliant on someone's digital identity to make certain that we are now providing product to someone who says they are who they are.
Again,
tell me, what are some of these new payment programs? Like, how have they created complexities and opportunities for fraudsters?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned buy now, pay later, which is an interesting point where a lot of people create these accounts, wallets on these neobanks apps or wallet apps, taking it over, or just sort of it's a fraudulent account to begin with, and started defrauding all the buy now, pay later folks, right? And either they ship the goods and then found out there's a chargeback, or the money was no good, or do these curbside pickups. And if you go to your local retail store that has a pickup station, if you observe what kind of verification, they don't do anything, right? They come up with the goods, drop into your car. In fact, some of the locations that said pop your trunk will drop in the car. You don't even have to look at them in the eyes, and they drive off, right? And there's a charge off in 2 days, and it creates a massive amount of problem. But because it all starts with platform letting people create a financial transaction account, whether it's wallet or a neobank account, and the merchants have to eat that chargeback at the end of the day. It's millions of dollars at stake here.
Exactly. So let's talk about workflows for a moment on the next slide. Certainly, where and when should someone ingest the data? And once they've ingested the data, and ingest the data in our case would mean, right, provide the email address with an IP address and then if you even have a physical address and their name, certainly provide that also. But if you can, you call out an API to get a fraud score back, where would you start ingesting the data? I think you've alluded to it, but let's just be like straight out in the journey. Where's the best place?
Right. A lot of merchants, companies will buy traffic from lead generators or from marketers, ad rolls, banners, and things like that, right? So I will push it all the way to the very beginning of it, right? If you're buying traffic, buying leads from other people, right? The first line of defense is whether you want to buy this lead, right? So for all the marketing folks, you got hard-earned marketing budget, right? You're buying leads from lead generators. You probably want to start scanning that right there and say, hey, you know what? Out of these 100 leads, I'm only going to pay for 80 of these because 20 of them are no good. I know this is no good because I use data. And let's just say that some of that stuff filters out all the way down to an account opening stage, right? Obviously, the first thing you want to do is as soon as you capture an email address, you want to do a scan. And you can choose to let the person go through the process without really, ask them to jump through hoops and then do an offline kind of a secondary screening. Or you can say, you know what, at this time we couldn't offer you anything, but if you do X, Y, and Z, or somebody will call you on a higher end, sort of high dollar, high value transaction, you can put them through a white glove treatment. So I will start all the way from where are you getting this lead from? Why are they coming in from your affiliate channels and whatever it might be, all the way down to the first line of defense. As soon as you get their mobile phone number or email address, go ping it. And if it really happens, if you let them go through and you see some kind of a nefarious activity, transactional payments and things like that, you could probably use this tool again to see if this email address start to exhibit some fraudulent behavior. It may not show at your point of origination, right? Could have been a week now, right? And all of a sudden there's a high intensity of activities on this email. Then you can say, you know what, this needs some additional treatment. So from marketing, originations all the way to, the first couple of actions you're going to take on the product itself.
Absolutely. And if you think about from a workflow perspective also, right, you might have what looks like a high value transaction, which you might want to treat differently than a low value transaction. So you might see a high fraud score for both, but you might want to move to a manual review that. But at any rate, you're saving costs on doing more. You'll do less manual reviews. The waterfall process, you're going to use you're going to end up, identifying more fraud and spending less money, and that's a really good thing to be able to do. The other opportunity is always think about in your workflows the customer service aspect. Like, how do you let somebody know that you're not transacting with them? And that's an okay thing to do. Like, it's just another form of protection for our customers.
That's right.
And so, as you're ingesting the data and you're optimizing the experience and you want to activate that customer, right? There's a lot of opportunities there. You could do some real simple stuff, and some of your clients require some really complex things. And for that, there's great orchestration organizations out there that can help you orchestrate the entire workflow. That's what they do. It's similar to the workflows that you get, through your marketing automation machines.
Yeah.
So I think it's really an interesting opportunity. I want to make sure we have time to get to questions. Let's just jump to the next slide real quickly, and then we'll take a few questions. But Tim, you talk about this all the time. Like if I get a score, right?
Right.
A fraud score is generally a score of 1 to 100 of this email is really likely fraud, or this email is really a good, solid, excellent email from a user who we see a lot of activity.
Yeah.
So
There's
the exhaust of that. Let's talk about the exhaust of that.
That's right. Yeah. There's everything's a two-edged sword in my mind. First, just because the email that was created recently doesn't mean it's a bad customer. Right? It could be a new to market kind of a customer, 17 and a half, 18, 19-year-old that doesn't really have a whole lot of digital presence, and all of a sudden there's a flourish of activities, right? Those could be all good customers, future customers. And the other side of the sword is this: lots of fraudsters will open an account and sleep on it for a month and have no activity, right? Trying to get through the honeymoon period and start acting strange, right? That's when you want to do that secondary screen as well. But there's a lot of, not everything is bad. So the question is, just because they scored in a sort of a ambiguous kind of a score doesn't mean that they're bad. And in a month or two, a quarter or so, or 6 months or so, you might want to rescore that person and see if this is actually a legitimate customer that is now active and ready to do business, right? Ready to buy.
Absolutely. Yeah, that dormant client who spent a lot of time. On the flip side, now, if you got a really low score for fraud, it means it's a great client, and you could treat that customer, with maybe greater frequency in your mailing, with more aggressive messaging, because they're going to be more likely to use that email to transact, and that's a really good thing.
Right.
So let's just recap some takeaways and address questions, because I think I want to be mindful of everyone's time. But from a key takeaway, the email address becomes a great frontline fraud prevention. And many of the folks on this call that are listening in, they own email address acquisition, right? And so immediately you can prove the ROI of your program by eliminating fraud with technology that recognizes fraud against an email address. It's a great opportunity for you to make certain that you're safely bringing email addresses into your CRM that you want to work with. While if you do it on the front end, the added benefit is working with your affiliate marketers, right, to identify sub-affiliates that you should be removing from your streams. So that's one great one. Tim, you want to speak towards any other takeaways?
Again, from originations, acquisition, all the way to account opening, all the way to activation, meaning that they're going to start spending money or buy from you. All these 3 points are really good critical points for you to establish a relationship and to do a ping to say, hey, is this customer good enough? Is it relevant enough? Is it really ready to shop? All these things are critical points where you want to do a ping to see if this is a legitimate transaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then lastly, by getting the data you need at the right point, right? You're going to create, you can continue to create that great customer experience you're looking for. It's frictionless, it's seamless, it moves through, really well. But you're going to also be able to identify the user that's hiding behind an email address that you don't want to work with.
Right.
So I think those are your key takeaways. I just want to make sure we take a few minutes for a few questions. I think April's going to join us with some questions.
I am here. Thank you. That was great, guys. Thanks so much. If anybody has any questions, just put them in the question section on the right. Thank you. And while we have Phil and Tim here, the experts, to answer them, I highly recommend it. Phil and Tim, our first question is a two-parter. It says, what are some of the ways you can block invalid or recently created emails, and are there services you recommend?
Yeah, well, I can probably answer this question, right? The best way to start is that if you have if you have a baseline customer, you got millions or hundreds of thousands of emails already collected, it's probably a good idea to cleanse that a little bit, to scan through that a little bit. Certainly Phil Davis here could probably point you to the right direction there. So I'll start from there to just get a baseline read on what's happening in your system. And then we can they can overlay a score, a custom score for you, in fact, or some attributes to start identifying, hey, a couple of strategies with you. So I would, point at data to provide those services. I think those are.
And of course, April, that's our fraud prevention service. It's a fraud API. And so it's really, we ingest an email address and IP at minimum. We can do an email, IP, and a full name, and then we return a fraud score along with the data that the underlying scores that feed that fraud score. So we believe in, if we say something's going to be fraud, we want to show you the fields that led us to believe that the data science, drove that score. Plus those fields help you build out your workflows.
Yeah, remind me, do you guys have any deliverability kind of a assessment that this is, a kind of an invalid email that, it's on the
so that's built into the product. We've been doing email validation and email deliverability, both fresh address and tower data, for 21 years. We have a tremendous history of that, which means we have a great domain knowledge, IP knowledge, email address knowledge, and that's really useful for helping us weed out the obvious, like, this is clearly, don't let this in, this is a bad email. But at the end of the day, it's finding those deliverable emails that are fraudsters, and that is where all of the behavioral data that we have that comes into place.
And that'll help you with your IP. That'll help you with your IP reputation, all that stuff to get rid of all the invalids.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, next question. Is this service a standalone / comprehensive fraud service, or do clients use other services within the journey?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and I'll let Tim take a little bit. So for some clients, it can be a very, there's a lot of merchants that this can be a first step standalone solution, meaning that they have nothing in place. That was our experience with some of our early clients. They had nothing in place and they had a problem. They came to data experts to help them solve it. And you can use it that way. And then there's other clients who have complex, real complex needs, and they have other fraud, very, they're looking at a lot of information, whether it's, at the end of the day, underwriting is a fraud activity. It's it's trying to find people who aren't eligible and qualified for a loan, who are going to use fake information to allow them to get that loan. That's not frictionless. That's a tough process, but it's important, and that should be lower in the waterfall. So when you think about how we fit in with a lot of other fraud technologies, and certainly if you're using some, come talk to us and we can really help you understand where we fit. And then, if you already are working with your own orchestration company, we fit in really well. Tim, is there anything you want to add to that?
It's as a practitioner, push that as upfront as possible. If you want a fast and inexpensive turnaround, it's a simple API to call, right? A couple of the score and attributes, it'll save a lot of problems. And when I say inexpensive, I don't mean just the cost of that service. Is the compliance issues you're going to have to deal with if you let them go through right into your process, and all the additional people that you have to hire to verify, to do these all to do these out-of-band verifications, right? If you kill them up front, it'll save you a lot of time and effort. And compliance is a big thing for all these financial services folks on the call. You know, if you might get into TCPA issues if you let the bad person in, ECOA, FCRA issues. That's going to be a lot of strain on your compliance department. So get rid of it as soon as possible, as upfront as possible. That'll be my recommendation.
Awesome. I think we just have time for another question or two. How do your clients act on the fraud data they receive? That's interesting.
So, you know, it's interesting that, you know, we have clients do a variety of things. At the end of the day, I think what happens, because we give you a score and all these other raw fields, we give our clients the opportunity to act on the data that's consistent with their customer service promise, right? And so what many clients will do is weed out fraud right up front by using our data, but the real question is how you act on it. How are you messaging back to your customers? Maybe a simple message says, hey, you know, your email didn't pass our check. Please contact customer support for help. Fraudsters don't contact customer support. That's just not what they do, but legitimate people do.
That's right.
And so, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah. These real account takeovers, a legitimate customer got hurt because their account got compromised. That information is important because there's a feedback loop at data, right? You can share that information with the data scientists over at data, and they can actually customize a model or a strategy for you specifically. So that information is important to you to triage a situation, and also it's important for this relationship where they can actually build custom models that specifically fixated on the way that you do business. So that feedback loop is also important here.
Great. Do you want to take one more?
Sure.
Okay. Last one. How do you produce a fraud score? And I think we might have something in the appendix today that might have to do with that.
Well, we get this is the question we get every time, so we have a prep. Why don't you just, you can take us to the next slide. So at the end of the day, a fraud score comes from a number of other fields. We look at the behavioral insights. So we see at data 1 billion API calls every month. And from that, we know a lot about an email address. We know how often it's used, how many different places it's being used. We know generally when it was born, or at the very least when we first saw it. And so those are behavioral insights. So that's real important. We check for tumbling. If we're provided a name and postal address, we can look at a correlation with that email and postal. Is this email tied to a lot of different names and postal addresses, or is there a postal address that's tied to many, many email addresses that sit outside of the norm, right? Or is it right on par with what we expect? We look for those email address anomalies. We do a domain analysis. We do IP verification. Of course, as I mentioned, we do email validation. And then our clients help us fight fraud together by participating in a fraud consortium. So they send back fraud, no fraud feedback to us so that we can help, you know, fight fraud as a group. And that's a really important thing. The other benefit of the feedback data is that we'll fine tune a model that's specific to a client's product, service, region, country code, you know, right. that all those things come into play. And certainly Tim's played with all these data fields. Is there anything else?
No, this is the world I live in. Certainly there's a great score comes from ad data that can get you guys started. Over time, if you participate in a fraud consortium, if you have your own fraud data or loss data or some kind of a information to at the end of that story, you guys can also build a rich custom model for yourself using all of these attributes that are available at data. So
right.
That's it. I think.
Oh, good stuff. I think that's it for today. I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks Phil and Tim for a great session today. We have Phil's contact information on the screen. You can also scan the QR code for your convenience. And again, we'll be sending out the replay in a couple of days via email to anybody registered or attended. And you can share that with anyone you would like. And I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.